"No man wants me," the trembling bride cried, her wedding dress torn and dusty from yet another abandonment at the altar. Across the emptying church, the giant cowboy leaned forward from the back pew, his voice cutting through her despair like thunder. "No man deserves you." The frontier town branded her cursed. 3 failed weddings, too educated, too bold for any decent suitor. They whispered she'd die a spinster, stitching wedding dresses for others while her own dreams withered. But the mountain of a man saw what they couldn't. Fire where they saw failure, strength where they saw stubbornness. He carried secrets that could either lift her from the dust or bury them both beneath the weight of his family's sins. The inheritance letter burning in her pocket would change everything. But would she survive long enough to claim what was rightfully hers? Or would the forces conspiring against her destroy the only chance at the life she'd never dared dream possible? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. Clara Jane Whitaker stood frozen at the altar, her white dress now a mockery of hope. The church doors slammed shut behind Thomas Mitchell, her third runaway groom in 2 years. The congregation shifted in their wooden pews, whispers spreading like wildfire through the small frontier church. She clutched her bouquet of prairie flowers until her knuckles turned white. Her grandmother's pearl necklace felt heavy against her throat. The preacher cleared his throat awkwardly, unsure whether to continue the ceremony or dismiss the gathering. The town ladies didn't bother lowering their voices. Mrs. Henderson leaned toward her neighbor. "That's what happens when a woman gets too big for her britches." Mrs. Watson nodded vigorously. "All that book learning makes a woman unfit for marriage." Their cruel laughter echoed off the church walls. Clara's legs threatened to buckle beneath her. She had sewn this dress herself, working by candlelight for weeks. Every stitch represented her dreams of finally belonging somewhere. Now those dreams lay shattered like broken glass at her feet. From the back pew, a mountain of a man watched silently. Elijah Granger sat perfectly still while chaos erupted around him. He didn't join the gossip or shake his head in judgment. His weathered hands rested calmly on his knees as he studied Clara's face. Clara finally found her voice. "Thank you all for coming. Please enjoy the cake." Her words came out steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. She lifted her chin and walked down the aisle with as much dignity as she could muster. The crowd parted before her like she carried some contagious disease. Children stared with wide eyes while their mothers pulled them closer. Clara pushed through the church doors into the harsh afternoon sun. Her small seamstress shop sat across the dusty main street. The sign above the door read, "C. Whitaker Fine Tailoring," in careful script. She had painted those letters herself the day she opened for business 3 years ago. Clara stumbled inside and locked the door behind her. Bolts of fabric lined the walls in neat rows. Half-finished dresses hung on wooden forms like ghosts of other women's happiness. Her sewing machine sat in the corner, covered with scraps from the wedding dress that had taken her weeks to complete. She sank into her chair and buried her face in her hands. The humiliation burned worse than any physical pain. 3 engagements, 3 abandoned ceremonies, 3 public rejections that proved what everyone already believed. Something was fundamentally wrong with her. The door chime rang softly. Clara looked up to see Elijah Granger filling her doorway. His massive frame made her small shop seem even smaller. He removed his hat and stepped inside carefully, as if afraid he might break something. "Miss Whitaker." His voice was deep and gentle. "I have some mending that needs doing." Clara wiped her eyes quickly. "Of course. What can I help you with?" Elijah reached into a canvas bag and pulled out a leather vest with torn stitching along the shoulder. "Ranch work is hard on clothes." She examined the damage with professional interest. The leather was high quality, but well worn. "This will take a few days to repair properly." "That's fine. Take your time." He placed the vest on her counter, along with 2 silver dollars. "No rush." Clara stared at the money. It was more than fair payment for such simple work. "This is too much." "Good work deserves good pay." Elijah's eyes met hers directly. "You're the finest seamstress in 3 territories." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. He wasn't offering charity or pity. He spoke with the quiet respect of one professional, acknowledging another. Before she could respond, boots thundered on the wooden sidewalk outside. A young man in a telegraph uniform burst through her door, breathing hard from running. "Miss Whitaker, got an urgent message for you from Montana Territory." Clara's hands shook as she took the telegram. Her grandmother's name was printed at the top. They hadn't spoken in 15 years, not since Clara had chosen to stay in Kansas instead of following her west. She unfolded the paper and read the words twice before they made sense. Her grandmother was dead. The funeral had already happened. But there was more. According to the telegram, Grandmother Sarah had left Clara everything. The Whitaker Ranch sprawled across thousands of acres in Montana Territory. Cattle, horses, buildings, and land as far as the eye could see. The inheritance was worth more money than Clara had ever imagined. But there was a condition. She had 1 year to prove she could run the ranch successfully. If she failed, everything would be sold and the money donated to charity. Clara read the telegram a third time. Her hand stopped shaking as the full meaning sank in. She wasn't cursed or unwanted. She was about to become one of the wealthiest landowners in the territory. Elijah watched her face carefully. "Good news?" Clara looked up at him with new eyes. For the first time in years, she smiled with genuine happiness instead of polite pretense. "Mr. Granger, how would you feel about a change of scenery?" The wagon wheels creaked steadily along the dusty trail to Montana Territory. Clara sat beside Elijah on the driver's bench, her wedding dress packed away in favor of practical traveling clothes. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by distant mountains that grew larger with each passing day. Elijah handled the horses with quiet expertise. He spoke only when necessary, pointing out landmarks or warning of rough terrain ahead. Clara appreciated his silence. It gave her time to think about the enormous change her life had taken. 3 days into their journey, Elijah finally broke the comfortable quiet between them. "Ranch work isn't like sewing, Miss Whitaker. It's hard on the body and harder on the spirit." Clara adjusted her bonnet against the sun. "I'm stronger than I look." "I don't doubt that, but strength and skill are different things." She studied his weathered profile. "That's why I need an experienced foreman." Elijah nodded once. "Fair enough." The Whitaker Ranch appeared on the 4th day like a mirage shimmering in the heat. Clara's heart sank as they approached the main gate. The wooden fence posts leaned at odd angles. Sections of fencing lay broken on the ground. Weeds grew thick around the entrance. The main house sat on a small rise overlooking the valley. Paint peeled from its walls in long strips. Several windows were boarded up with rough planks. The front porch sagged under the weight of accumulated debris. Clara climbed down from the wagon on unsteady legs. This wasn't the prosperous ranch she had imagined. It looked more like an abandoned ruin than a working cattle operation. Elijah surveyed the damage with professional interest. "How long since your grandmother passed?" 6 months, according to the telegram. "That explains some of it, but this neglect goes back further than that." They walked toward the barn, their boots crunching on dead grass. The barn doors hung open, revealing empty stalls and scattered hay. A few chickens pecked listlessly in the dirt nearby, but there were no cattle in sight. Inside the house, dust covered every surface like a gray blanket. Mice had built nests in the kitchen cabinets. The parlor furniture sat under stained sheets that hadn't been moved in months. Clara found her grandmother's bedroom on the 2nd floor. A leather journal lay open on the nightstand beside the bed. The pages were filled with Sarah Whitaker's careful handwriting, documenting the ranch's decline over the past 5 years. Drought had killed half the cattle herd 3 summers ago. Prairie fires destroyed winter feed supplies the following year. Workers left to find steadier employment elsewhere. Sarah had been fighting a losing battle against time and nature. But the journal also revealed something else. Sarah Whitaker had been a formidable woman who refused to surrender easily. She had negotiated water rights with neighboring ranchers. She had bred horses that commanded top prices at market. She had built this ranch from nothing and defended it against every challenge. Clara closed the journal and looked out the bedroom window. The valley spread below her like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Despite its current condition, she could see the ranch's potential. Good water, fertile grazing land, and shelter from winter storms. Elijah appeared in the doorway. "Found something interesting in the barn." Clara followed him outside to where he had uncovered a small pen hidden behind the main structure. Inside, a dozen of the most beautiful horses she had ever seen grazed peacefully. Their coats gleamed in the afternoon sun despite their surroundings. "Your grandmother bred champion bloodlines. These animals are worth a fortune to the right buyers." Clara approached the fence carefully. One of the horses, a magnificent black stallion, walked over to investigate the newcomers. His intelligent eyes studied her face as if measuring her character. "He was her favorite," Elijah said quietly. "Name's Thunder, according to the records I found." Clara reached out slowly and let Thunder sniff her hand. His nose was soft and warm against her palm. For the first time since arriving, she felt a spark of hope. That evening, they sat on the front porch planning their approach. Clara had found more journals documenting her grandmother's methods and contacts. Elijah shared his knowledge of cattle ranching and seasonal schedules. "First priority is getting the cattle back," Elijah explained. "Some probably wandered onto neighboring land. Others might have been claimed by rustlers who figured nobody would notice." Clara made notes in the margins of her grandmother's journal. "How do we prove ownership? Brand marks and registration papers. Your grandmother was thorough with her record keeping." They worked by lamplight until well past midnight, creating lists of tasks and priorities. Clara felt more energized than she had in months. This was real work with measurable goals and clear objectives. The next morning brought their first visitor. A thin man in an expensive suit rode up to the house on a well-groomed horse. He dismounted and approached with the confident swagger of someone accustomed to getting his way. "You must be Sarah's granddaughter. Name's Blackwood, Theodore Blackwood." He removed his hat with exaggerated politeness. "I own the railroad development company that's been working with local landowners." Clara stepped onto the porch but didn't descend to his level. "What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwood?" "Actually, I'm here to help you. This ranch is too much for a woman to handle alone. I'm prepared to make a generous offer for the property." Elijah moved to stand beside Clara, his presence suddenly menacing despite his silence. Clara smiled politely. "Thank you for the offer, but I'm not interested in selling." Blackwood's friendly expression flickered for just a moment. "Perhaps you should reconsider. Ranching is dangerous work for someone without experience." Thunder neighed loudly from his pen, as if echoing Clara's growing suspicion that this man's visit was no coincidence. Theodore Blackwood returned 3 days later with a leather satchel and 2 men in uniform. The sheriff's badge gleamed on the older man's vest, while his deputy stood silently behind him. Their presence transformed Blackwood's polite visit into something far more threatening. Clara emerged from the barn where she had been cataloging her grandmother's breeding records. Elijah appeared at her shoulder, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the yard. "Miss Whitaker, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about your inheritance." Blackwood opened his satchel and withdrew an official-looking document. "These are the original water rights for this property. As you can see, they belong to the Blackwood Railroad Company." Clara took the papers and examined them carefully. The language was dense with legal terminology, but something felt wrong about the document's appearance. The ink looked too fresh for papers supposedly filed years ago. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to vacate the premises by week's end. Mr. Blackwood has legal claim to this land." "That's impossible." Clara's voice remained steady despite her racing heart. "My grandmother owned this ranch for 20 years. Your grandmother was living here illegally." Blackwood's polite mask slipped slightly. "She never had proper title to the water sources. Without water rights, the land is worthless for cattle ranching." Clara studied the document more closely. Her education had included extensive reading practice with legal documents. Her father had insisted she learn to protect herself from men who might try to cheat her with complicated paperwork. The signatures looked authentic, but the paper quality was inconsistent with documents from the claimed filing date. More importantly, The legal descriptions didn't match the geographical features she had observed around the ranch. This boundary description is incorrect. Clara pointed to a specific line in the text. It references Willow Creek as the eastern border, but Willow Creek runs north to south through the center of the property. Blackwood snatched the papers back. Clerical errors don't invalidate legal documents. They do when the errors make the claim impossible to fulfill. Clara crossed her arms. I'll need time to research the Territorial Land Office records before I accept these claims. Sheriff Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Blackwood says you got 1 week. The law says she has 30 days to dispute the claim. Elijah's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Unless Montana Territory changed its legal procedures recently. The sheriff's face reddened. You stay out of this, Granger. Clara noticed the sheriff knew Elijah's name without introduction. Small towns bred familiarity, but something in Morrison's tone suggested a deeper connection. After the men left, Clara retreated to her grandmother's study with the ranch records. She spread Sarah's journals across the desk and began cross-referencing dates and transactions. Hours of careful reading revealed a disturbing pattern. 3 other ranchers in the valley had sold their properties to Blackwood's company within the past 2 years. In each case, mysterious problems had plagued their operations immediately before the sales. Cattle disappearing, water sources contaminated, equipment damaged by unknown vandals. Elijah found her still reading by lamplight well past midnight. He set a cup of coffee beside her elbow and studied the papers scattered across the desk. Your grandmother was thorough with her documentation. He picked up a bound ledger filled with Sarah's careful handwriting. She suspected someone was targeting local ranchers. Clara rubbed her tired eyes. Look at this pattern. Every ranch that sold to Blackwood experienced the same problems we're having now. The missing cattle, the broken fences, the contaminated water sources. Exactly. Someone is systematically driving ranchers out of business so Blackwood can acquire their land cheaply. Elijah sat down across from her. There's something you should know about Sheriff Morrison. He owes money to some dangerous people in town. Blackwood has been known to pay debts in exchange for favors. Clara felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. So Blackwood creates the problems, then offers to solve them by buying the property. And Morrison ensures no one investigates too closely. Clara stood and walked to the window overlooking the valley. Moonlight painted the landscape in silver tones, making it look peaceful and serene. But she knew predators often hunted under cover of darkness. We need proof of their scheme. Clara turned back to Elijah. Something solid enough to present to the territorial authorities. That means catching them in the act. Or finding evidence of their previous crimes. Elijah nodded slowly. Your grandmother might have kept records we haven't found yet. They searched the house systematically, checking every drawer and cabinet. In the cellar, Clara discovered a hidden compartment behind loose stones in the wall. Inside lay a metal box containing Sarah's most sensitive documents. The papers revealed everything. Sarah had been documenting the conspiracy against local ranchers for months before her death. She had gathered sworn statements from displaced families, copies of suspicious legal filings, and even photographs of damaged property. Most damaging of all was a letter from a former Blackwood employee who confessed to participating in the sabotage operations. He described specific instructions to contaminate water sources and drive cattle onto neighboring land where they could be claimed as strays. Clara held the letter up to the lamplight. This is exactly what we need. There's more. Elijah pulled out a detailed map showing the proposed railroad route through the valley. Blackwood needed a continuous stretch of land to build his tracks. Every ranch that refused to sell represented an obstacle to his plans. He's not just stealing individual properties. He's trying to control the entire transportation corridor through the territory. Clara felt a surge of determination, unlike anything she had experienced during her failed engagements. This wasn't about her personal happiness or social acceptance. This was about justice and protecting other families from Blackwood's predatory schemes. We take this evidence to the territorial capital. Clara began organizing the documents into a coherent presentation. But first, we need to secure the ranch against further sabotage. Elijah smiled grimly. I know some men who can help with that. Cowboys who worked for your grandmother before she died. They've been looking for honest work." Thunder whinnied from his pen outside, as if sensing the change in the wind. Clara woke before dawn to prepare for the journey to the territorial capital. She packed Sarah's evidence carefully in a leather satchel, wrapping each document in oilcloth to protect it from the weather. The courthouse hearing was scheduled for the following week, giving them barely enough time to make the 3-day ride. Elijah saddled their horses while she secured the ranch. The 3 cowboys he had recruited arrived as promised, weathered men who had worked these lands for years. They would guard the property while Clara fought for its legal ownership. As Clara mounted her horse, she noticed Elijah checking his saddlebags with unusual care. Something metallic glinted inside before he closed the flap quickly. She thought nothing of it at the time. They rode hard through the morning, covering ground at a pace that tested both horses and riders. The landscape changed gradually from rolling hills to dense forest as they approached the territorial boundary. Clara had never traveled so far from home, and the vastness of the country both thrilled and intimidated her. During their midday rest, Elijah's horse threw a shoe on rocky ground. While he worked to replace it, Clara explored their temporary campsite near a small stream. Behind a fallen log, she discovered a canvas bag that had been hastily hidden. Curiosity overcame caution. Clara opened the bag and found official correspondence bearing the Blackwood Railroad Company letterhead. Her blood turned cold as she read the first letter. The documents revealed Elijah's true identity. He wasn't just a ranch foreman looking for work. He was Theodore Blackwood's son, specifically assigned to infiltrate her operation and gather intelligence about her legal defenses. Clara's hands shook as she read deeper into the correspondence. The letters detailed Elijah's original mission to befriend her, assess the strength of her inheritance claim, and identify weaknesses that could be exploited in court. But the dates on the letters told a confusing story. The most recent communication was 3 months old. Theodore had written multiple angry messages demanding updates that apparently never came. The final letter threatened to disown Elijah entirely if he didn't complete his assignment. Clara heard footsteps approaching and quickly stuffed the letters back into the bag. Elijah appeared through the trees, leading his newly shod horse. His expression was calm and focused, giving no hint of the deception he had been practicing for months. "Ready to continue?" Elijah asked, checking her horse's tack with professional thoroughness. Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her mind raced with implications and questions. How much of their partnership had been genuine? Had he been reporting her plans to Theodore all along? Was she riding straight into a trap? They traveled the rest of the day in relative silence. Clara claimed fatigue, but she was actually studying Elijah's behavior for signs of duplicity. He seemed genuinely concerned about her comfort and safety. His knowledge of ranching appeared authentic, not the superficial understanding of someone playing a role. That evening they made camp in a sheltered valley beside a clear mountain stream. Elijah built their fire and prepared a simple meal while Clara pretended to review her legal documents. In reality, she was planning her next moves. She could confront Elijah directly and demand an explanation. She could flee during the night and attempt to reach the territorial capital alone. She could pretend ignorance and see what he revealed about his true loyalties. As if sensing her internal struggle, Elijah sat down across the fire from her. The flames cast dancing shadows across his weathered features, making him look like a stranger despite their weeks of partnership. "Something's troubling you." His voice carried genuine concern. "Are you worried about the hearing?" Clara looked up from her papers. "Should I be? Blackwood has money and connections. The territorial judges aren't immune to influence. You seem to know a lot about his methods." Elijah stared into the fire for a long moment. "I know more about Theodore Blackwood than I care to admit." Clara's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "What kind of man is he?" "The kind who destroys everything he touches, including his own family." The bitterness in Elijah's voice surprised her. Whatever his relationship with Theodore, it clearly involved pain and resentment. Clara decided to press further. "You sound like you know him personally. Elijah looked up sharply, meeting her eyes across the fire. For a moment she thought he might confess everything. Instead, he stood abruptly and walked to the edge of their campsite. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Clara lay in her bedroll, staring at the stars and wrestling with her decision. The evidence of Elijah's deception was clear, but his recent actions suggested a man conflicted about his loyalties. He had provided genuine help with the ranch operations. His advice about legal procedures appeared sound. Most importantly, he possessed information about Blackwood's methods that could prove crucial in court. She thought about her grandmother's journals and the pattern of betrayal Sarah had documented. Theodore Blackwood specialized in exploiting trust and turning allies against each other. Perhaps Elijah had been another victim rather than a willing conspirator. As dawn approached, Clara made her choice. She would continue to the territorial capital with Elijah, but she would be prepared for any eventuality. If he betrayed her in court, she would face that challenge when it came. But if he chose to stand against his father, she would give him that opportunity. The morning brought fresh challenges. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, threatening to slow their progress. They would need to ride hard to reach the capital before the scheduled hearing. Clara packed her evidence with extra care, knowing that everything she had worked for depended on reaching the courthouse with Sarah's documents intact. The territorial courthouse loomed over the dusty Capitol street like a monument to frontier justice. Clara dismounted her horse and smoothed her travel-worn dress, grateful she had packed her finest clothes for this moment. The leather satchel containing her grandmother's evidence felt heavy against her shoulder. Theodore Blackwood stood on the courthouse steps surrounded by 3 lawyers in expensive suits. His silver hair gleamed in the morning sun, and his confident smile suggested a man accustomed to victory. He nodded politely to Clara as she approached, treating her like a minor inconvenience rather than a serious opponent. "Miss Whitaker, I'm surprised you chose to pursue this matter. Surely we could have reached a reasonable settlement without involving the courts." Clara climbed the steps without pausing. "Some things can't be settled with money. Mr. Blackwood." Inside the courthouse, curious spectators filled the wooden benches. Word had spread about the unusual case of a young woman challenging the powerful railroad baron. Local ranchers sat alongside townspeople, all eager to witness the confrontation. Judge Harrison took his seat at the elevated bench, his stern expression revealing nothing about his sympathies. He had served the territory for 15 years and commanded respect from both sides of any dispute. "This hearing will determine the validity of competing claims to the Whitaker Ranch water rights. Mr. Blackwood, present your case first." Blackwood's lead attorney rose smoothly, his polished appearance contrasting sharply with Clara's simple dress and nervous energy. He presented their documentation with theatrical flair, emphasizing the official seals and legal language that might intimidate someone without formal education. "Your Honor, these territorial filings clearly establish my client's prior claim to all water sources on the disputed property. Miss Whitaker's grandmother was essentially a squatter who never obtained proper legal title." The attorney produced maps, surveys, and witness statements supporting their position. Everything appeared official and professionally prepared. Murmurs from the gallery suggested the audience found their arguments convincing. Clara studied each document as it was presented, her education serving her well in identifying inconsistencies and questionable claims. Her father's insistence on teaching her legal literacy now proved invaluable. When Blackwood's attorney finished, Judge Harrison turned to Clara. "Miss Whitaker, you may present your defense." Clara stood and approached the bench, her satchel clutched tightly in both hands. The courtroom fell silent as she began organizing her grandmother's evidence on the wooden table. "Your Honor, I believe Mr. Blackwood's documents contain several critical errors that invalidate his claims." She spread out Sarah's original land patents, carefully preserved in protective wrapping. The aged paper and genuine territorial seals contrasted sharply with Blackwood's newer documents. "These are my grandmother's original filings from 1858, showing clear title to the entire property, including all water sources." You'll notice the legal descriptions match exactly with the geographical features of the actual land. Clara pointed to specific sections of the text, explaining how Blackwood's survey descriptions referenced landmarks that didn't exist in the claimed locations. Her clear, educated speech surprised many observers who had expected a simple ranch woman. Next, she presented Sarah's correspondence with territorial officials, documenting years of legal water usage and livestock operations. The letters established a clear pattern of legitimate ranch management that contradicted claims of illegal squatting. But Clara's most powerful evidence came from Sarah's investigation into Blackwood's methods. She presented the sworn statements from displaced ranchers, each describing identical patterns of sabotage and intimidation. Your Honor, these testimonies reveal a systematic campaign to defraud legitimate landowners through fabricated legal claims and deliberate property damage. The courtroom erupted in surprised whispers. Several spectators recognized names mentioned in the testimonies. Blackwood's confident expression began showing cracks of concern. Clara's final piece of evidence was the confessional letter from the former Blackwood employee. She read it aloud, detailing specific instructions to contaminate water sources and drive cattle onto neighboring properties where they could be claimed as strays. Judge Harrison studied the letter carefully, comparing its details with the official documents presented by both sides. The inconsistencies in Blackwood's case became increasingly apparent under this scrutiny. Blackwood leaned forward and whispered urgently to his attorney. The lawyer stood immediately, objecting to the admission of what he called unverified accusations from a disgruntled former employee. Your Honor, these claims are impossible to substantiate. The alleged witness isn't present for cross-examination. Clara felt her case weakening. She had evidence of a pattern, but proving direct connection to her specific situation remained challenging. The letter was compelling but circumstantial. At that moment, Elijah rose from his seat in the gallery. The massive man walked slowly down the center aisle, every eye in the courtroom following his movement. Theodore Blackwood's face went pale as his son approached the witness area. Your Honor, I can verify the authenticity of those accusations. Judge Harrison looked up sharply. State your name and relationship to this case. Elijah Blackwood. I'm Theodore Blackwood's son, and I have direct knowledge of his illegal activities. The courtroom exploded in shocked conversation. Theodore shot to his feet, his face red with anger and betrayal. His attorneys huddled frantically, clearly unprepared for this development. Elijah's testimony was devastating and specific. He described the systematic campaign against local ranchers, naming dates, locations, and methods used to destroy their operations. He admitted his own initial involvement in spying on Clara, but explained how witnessing her integrity had changed his loyalties. I was sent to find weaknesses in Miss Whitaker's legal position. Instead, I discovered that she represents everything my father pretends to be, but never was. Honest, hardworking, and committed to building something instead of tearing it down. Theodore's attorneys tried desperately to discredit Elijah's testimony, suggesting family disputes and personal grudges motivated his accusations. But Elijah's detailed knowledge and calm demeanor made his words credible. Judge Harrison called for a brief recess to review all evidence presented. Clara sat in stunned silence, hardly believing that Elijah had chosen to stand with her against his own father. When court reconvened, the judge's decision was swift and decisive. Based on the evidence presented, I find Mr. Blackwood's claims to be fraudulent and his methods criminal. Miss Whitaker's title to the Whitaker Ranch is hereby confirmed as valid and uncontested. The gavel's echo faded as Theodore Blackwood gathered his papers with shaking hands. His attorneys avoided eye contact while packing their leather cases. The man who had terrorized an entire valley now looked like what he truly was, a common criminal exposed by his own son's conscience. Clara remained seated, hardly believing the victory was real. Months of doubt and fear dissolved in an instant. The Whitaker Ranch belonged to her completely, protected by territorial law and witnessed by a courtroom full of her peers. Judge Harrison's voice cut through the celebration. Mr. Theodore Blackwood, you'll remain in custody pending investigation of fraud charges. The territorial marshal will escort you to jail. Theodore's fury finally erupted. He lunged toward Elijah with surprising speed for his age. 2 bailiffs restrained him before he could reach his son. You've destroyed everything I built, everything I worked for. Elijah met his father's gaze without flinching. I've stopped you from destroying everything decent people built. The marshals led Theodore away in iron shackles. His expensive suit and silver hair couldn't hide the fact that he was just another criminal facing justice. The spectators watched in silence as the most powerful man in the territory shuffled out the door like any common prisoner. Clara found herself standing on the courthouse steps beside the man who had saved her ranch and possibly her life. The afternoon sun painted everything in golden light, making the dusty street look almost beautiful. "Why did you do it?" Clara's question came out softer than she intended. Elijah adjusted his hat and looked toward the mountains. "Spent my whole life watching him hurt people. Finally met someone worth fighting for instead of against." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, both processing the magnitude of what had transpired. Clara's mind raced with plans for rebuilding. Elijah seemed lost in thoughts about his uncertain future. Word of their victory traveled faster than their horses. By the time they reached the ranch, neighbors had gathered to offer congratulations and assistance. The same people who had whispered about the cursed seamstress now praised the brave woman who had defeated corruption. Mrs. Henderson from town brought a basket of fresh bread. "We always knew you had backbone, dear. Just took the right circumstances to show it." Clara accepted the compliment graciously, though she remembered Mrs. Henderson's cruel laughter at her abandoned wedding ceremony. People's memories grew conveniently short when circumstances changed. Over the following weeks, the Whitaker Ranch transformed from neglected ruin into thriving operation. The cowboys Elijah had recruited worked with renewed enthusiasm now that their employment was secure. Cattle returned to proper pastures as legal boundaries were reestablished. Clara threw herself into learning every aspect of ranch management. She studied her grandmother's breeding records and consulted with horse traders about Thunder's bloodline. The magnificent stallion had sired several foals that commanded impressive prices at regional markets. Local ranchers began seeking Clara's advice on legal matters and business decisions. Her education and recent court victory established her as someone who understood both the practical and legal aspects of land ownership. Elijah worked alongside her with quiet dedication, but Clara sensed his uncertainty about their personal relationship. The deception that had brought them together cast shadows over their growing feelings for each other. One evening, as they reviewed the ranch's financial records, Clara decided to address the elephant in the room. "Do you regret what you did in court?" Elijah looked up from the ledger he was studying. "Which part?" "Testifying against your father, choosing my side over your family. Theodore stopped being family the day he asked me to betray an innocent woman." Elijah's voice carried no doubt or regret. "Some choices are easy once you know who you really are." Clara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I forgive you for the deception. You more than made up for it." Their fingers intertwined naturally, calloused from honest work and strengthened by shared struggles. The romantic tension that had simmered beneath their partnership finally found expression in a gentle kiss illuminated by lamplight. Spring brought new challenges and opportunities. Clara expanded the horse breeding program using Thunder's proven bloodlines. She negotiated grazing agreements with neighboring ranchers, creating cooperative relationships that benefited everyone involved. The territorial government appointed Clara to an advisory committee on land rights and agricultural development. Her combination of education and practical experience made her valuable in crafting policies that protected legitimate landowners while encouraging responsible development. Theodore Blackwood's trial resulted in a 10-year prison sentence and substantial fines. His railroad company collapsed without his leadership, protecting the valley from unwanted industrial development. Justice had been served completely and publicly. Clara stood once again in the small frontier church where her humiliation had begun. But this time, she wore her grandmother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her smaller frame. The pearl necklace caught the morning light streaming through stained glass windows. Elijah waited at the altar in his finest suit, no longer the silent observer from the back pew. His transformation from reluctant spy to devoted partner reflected Clara's own journey from rejected seamstress to confident rancher. The same townspeople who had whispered cruel gossip now beamed with genuine happiness for the couple. Even Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, apparently moved by the romantic redemption. As Clara walked down the aisle, she reflected on the strange path that had led to this moment. 3 abandoned weddings had taught her that being unwanted by the wrong people was infinitely better than being settled for by someone who couldn't appreciate her true worth. The preacher's words about love and partnership took on deeper meaning after everything they had endured together. When Elijah slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, Clara knew she had found something more valuable than any ranch or inheritance. She had found someone who saw her strength as beautiful rather than threatening, her intelligence as attractive rather than intimidating, and her independence as admirable rather than unwomanly. Their kiss sealed not just a marriage but a true partnership between equals who had chosen each other freely and completely.